And video number 2. So this is day 2 of my Canada Reads discussions, and I didn't do a channel intro. It's fine, we're just diving into it today. I'm Maddie, we're here, things are happening. So let's dive into the second book of Canada Reads. For those of you who don't know what Canada Reads is, it is a competition where we have 5 Canadian celebrities defend 5 different Canadian books, just debate over 5 days. At the end of each day, they vote up a book until one book wins, and that is the book that all of Canada should read, and this year the theme is one book to connect us. So the second book that I have to talk about, because I'm doing all of the books this week, is Five Little Indians, and this is written by Michelle Good. I'm just going to preface this by saying I'm going to use the word Indians because it's in the title, but also, like, as an Indigenous person, I've found reclamation and comfortability in the term Indians, so if I'm using it, that's for, like, my own personal understanding and comfortability with the term. If you're not an Indigenous person, I don't use it unless you're referring to the Indian Act or someone has specifically told you that that is the term that they feel most comfortable with. Alright, disclaimer over. Here's the premise of the novel. So this book follows 5 young kids who, when they are young, are sent to a small, remote, church-run residential school, and they're barely out of childhood when they're finally released from that school, and they're struggling through teenagehood into adulthood in downtown Eastside Vancouver, where they're trying to cling to one another to find support and safety and belonging to, in a world that doesn't really want them. And it follows them throughout their lives as their paths crisscross over the decades and they struggle to overcome or at least try to forget the trauma that they endured in the years at the mission. This actually has like a really long description, but I'm going to stop there because that gives you enough of it. So yeah, to dive a little bit more into the plot, we start when these kids are kids. I believe it starts in the 60s, and we follow them as they leave the school one by one, or some of the kids have already left the school, and into Vancouver, where they are, trying to find their way. I will get into this more with the different characters. We follow one of the characters for quite some time while she is exploring the American Indian movement, and all of these characters are kind of trying to find their way, the money to support them while also grappling with these demons, and, into the present, beginning with some of the early court cases to get settlements for residential school survivors, and kind of off into the rest of their life. Yeah, it's a very character-driven story, so let's just talk about the characters more. We have kind of 5 characters: Kenny, Lucy, Clara, Howie, and Maisie. We don't get a lot of Maisie just because of the way that her life goes. I will say content warnings for this book. There is addiction, drug use, suicide, discussions of rape and sexual assault, particularly with children. So there's a lot that you might want to take a deeper look into trigger content warnings list for this novel before you read it. We have Howie, whose family is able to help him escape from the school, and then years later, when faced with a brother who's one of the priests at the school who repeatedly raped him, he loses it and beats the shit out of him, which, as he should, and ends up in prison for it, and ends up in prison for quite some time because he refuses to be remorseful about it and has just been released on parole. We follow Clara, who is working at a motel and then is trying to kind of find her way in Vancouver, and she is the one who later finds her way getting involved in the American Indian movement and trying to find some reclamation and reconnection with her culture. Follow Lucy, who's only 16, when she's just sent away from the school on a bus to Vancouver by herself. She ends up with Maisie for a little bit and then really becomes good friends with Clara, starts working at the motel, and ends up having a child later on, and is, trying to support her child while also dealing with her own demons and trying to find secure housing and a job and all of that fun stuff. And then we have Kenny. So Kenny and Lucy are kind of sweethearts from the school. Like, they really got through the school because they were able to ground themselves in each other almost, like, you know, shared glances and passed notes and things like that throughout the school. And they, you know, there's some hope that they're going to be able to find a life in each other afterwards. But Kenny in particular is really struggling with alcoholism and also this feeling of like needing to run away. He feels he can't really be in one area for too long, otherwise he finds himself being pulled. So those are our characters. I loved and felt for them all dearly.
Hello and welcome to my other phone was being a bitch, so I have to fill in gaps in videos. So yes, I just finished talking about the characters and I'm going to start talking about what I didn't like, and then it's going to transition back into old me. So to start talking about what I didn't like about this book is, honestly, I didn't like that this book made me sad. Which is not a critique of the book in any way, but there is a huge, like, portion of Indigenous literature that is unfortunately dealing with the very raw traumas and realities that Indigenous people have had to face, but I find that incredibly difficult to deal with as an Indigenous person with, you know, experience dealing with a lot of the fallout of all of this shit that the government pulled. And towards the end of the book and like throughout the book, I was having a really difficult time reading it. And I think that's just because for me, I'm so exhausted of this narrative, not in a way that like I don't think people have, you know, are able to keep writing it. I think they should if that's what they want to write, the story that they need to tell. But I think for me, it's like a re-traumatization in a way. And I had a part in the middle where I just had to put the book down and I needed to take a break. And even at the end, I was having a really hard time getting to the end because I was just so upset and distraught of just the anger and frustration that I have in my life of people treating Indigenous people like garbage. And that's going to transition us back into old video.
Yeah, at the end I really had to push myself through it because I was just so upset. And I don't think that's a critique of the book. I think that's a critique of the neo-colonial state and racism. I guess my only, like, real critique of the book, which I might get into more with writing, is I wish they gave us times, because otherwise it just jumped from character to character and then through, like, context clues. Like, I don't know if they had gray in their hair or how old, like, Lucy's daughter was. We were kind of made to pick up what a lot of that was going on. So that was something that I think would have just helped for clarity for the reader throughout the book. What I did like throughout this book is the book never faults the characters for what happened to them. I don't know how to say what I like about this book, except it's a very raw and real fictionalization of something that has happened to a huge amount of kids. And I think understanding that everyone's going to get out of that and be able to process slash like recover as much as you can recover from something like that in different ways, and it doesn't fault the characters for the different ways that they come through things. In particular, I think Kenny, for him, you know, that need to run means that he's not really around a lot when Lucy and his daughter is growing up. And she really grows up to resent him because of that, but Lucy never does because she understands. You don't know what we went through, and if this is what he needs to do to be able to manage and cope with all of that, like, I can't fault him for that, and that's something I think that is really important as well. There's just a lot of humanity in this book, and it ripped my heart out, and I want to say I loved it for that, but also it hurt. Yep, that's what we're going to say about that. Writing-wise, this book was very well written. The only thing that I did find was sometimes when it was transitioning from character to character, it wanted to focus on another character, and it wasn't very clear, like, whose perspective we were getting. With Claire in particular, she spends time with an elder whose name is Mariah, and I think the book really wanted to try and show us more of Mariah. And so some points we were in a Clara section, but it was like, who is really talking or who are we really focusing on? And I think sometimes that transition from moving from one character's perspective to the next could have been done with like a little bit more fluidity and clarity. But other than that, it was a very good novel, very well done. I'm just gonna keep saying that because I have too many emotions and I don't want to start crying again. For how well this book connects us, I think this is where I have the hardest time, because I think I hope that we are beyond the point where we need a book like this to connect us. Like, we've been spending the last almost year now recovering bodies of children who were buried in like mass graves or unmarked graves at these schools. And I would hope that, you know, people have found empathy and understanding for the Indigenous community. I hate that it took that for them to find it, but I would have hoped. And I think that's where I really struggle with this being the one book to connect us. Because there's been so many Indigenous books that have come out, and so a lot of them have been on Canada Reads, and maybe this is the book that we need to finally get people to wake the fuck up. But also, I think I'm a little cynical from watching years and years of horrendous things happen and have people not wake up about it. I think where I stand in terms of this connecting us, I feel like I don't really have the best opinion on it reading it as an Indigenous person, but I am curious to hear how the non-Indigenous panelists felt that the book connected them to the community and maybe gave them a better understanding. For me, because this is something that, you know, is adjacent to my life, is something that I've been engaging with and aware of ever since I was little. It's not something that like really connected me in a new way, but I think if we're talking about maybe, you know, Indigenous people make up 4% of Canada, so if we're talking about like the other 96% of Canada, if this is going to draw that connection for them finally, then yeah, I'd be really interested to hear how this book did that for people. That's all I've got to say about this one. I know this isn't my most in-depth review. I actually did film a review of it earlier, but decided that I needed to do one where I wasn't just sobbing and being like, why do people suck? So this is my more critical review of the book, and I will see you all tomorrow for, at this point in time while I'm filming this, I haven't read the other 3 books, so I don't know what it's going to be. So stay tuned and stay kind until that video comes your way. If you want to subscribe so that you get notifications when the other videos come up, that would be amazing. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and if you've read the books or are watching this during Canada Reads, feel free to drop me a comment with your thoughts and what book you're hoping will win. Yeah, that's all. See you tomorrow.